I didn't open the door. Not that night. I stood with my back against the cool wood and listened to Daniel's voice, muffled but unmistakable. Claire, come on. Mom just wants to talk. You're blowing this out of proportion. Linda's sharper tone cut through. This is ridiculous. We're family. You don't just walk out of a family discussion. They still didn't understand. It wasn't a discussion. It was a declaration of ownership, delivered publicly, with no warning and no defense. And my husband had stood by and let it happen. So I stayed silent, waiting until their footsteps faded down the hallway. Then I turned the deadbolt, a sound that felt more final than any closing argument I'd ever made. The next morning, I checked my email. The building management had already responded. They confirmed receipt of my instructions and noted that no rental agreements, ownership changes, or family access requests would be processed without my direct written authorization. I forwarded the entire thread to my personal lawyer, a woman I'd known since my early days in architecture, sharp as glass and completely loyal. Her reply came within the hour. They tried to impose a verbal rent contract on a property you solely own. That's not just inappropriate, it's legally indefensible. You're protected. That was the immediate consequence, the quiet, irreversible lock clicking into place. Linda's demand, made in front of witnesses, was now a documented overreach. She had no claim. She never did. The financial consequence unfolded within days. Linda had clearly built a plan around that $1,000 a month, perhaps for her own expenses, perhaps to fund the family dinners she loved to host in my kitchen. When the first payment didn't arrive, she called Daniel, who called me, his voice strained. Mom says you owe the family. She's been counting on that contribution for the household budget. I almost laughed. The household budget for my apartment, which I paid for completely. I told him calmly, Daniel, I don't owe anyone rent on a property I own. And I'm not coming back to a place where my home is treated like a timeshare. When he tried to argue, I added something I knew would land like a stone. By the way, the apartment's mortgage is paid off. I did that 2 years before we met. So your mother's contribution was never going to cover anything except her sense of control. The silence on the line was thick. He hadn't known. That was by design. The psychological consequence hit harder. Daniel had built his identity as a son who honored his family, but now he was watching that same family fracture because of an overstep he hadn't stopped. Linda, meanwhile, had to face the truth that her new daughter-in-law wasn't a dependent girl she could mold. She was a 31-year-old woman with assets, boundaries, and absolutely no need to comply. I imagine her replaying that dinner scene, the way I smiled and said, that's fine, and realizing I wasn't being agreeable. I was announcing my exit. 3 days later, Linda decided to force a confrontation. She showed up at my studio again, this time alone. I let her in, not because I wanted to, but because I knew the final moral reckoning needed to happen face to face. She walked in, eyes scanning the small, clean space. So this is it. Your little secret. She folded her arms. You've embarrassed me in front of the whole family. Do you understand what you've done? They think I'm the villain now. I poured myself a glass of water and offered her nothing. Linda, you stood in my home and told me I had to pay rent. You called my property a family asset. You did that in front of witnesses without ever asking me. I simply declined the offer. Her voice sharpened. I was trying to bring you into the family. To teach you responsibility. Daniel's previous girlfriends would have been grateful. There it was, the mask fully off. I wasn't a daughter-in-law to her. I was an acquisition, and a disappointing one at that. I set down the glass and met her eyes. I'm not Daniel's previous girlfriend. I'm his wife, and I came into this marriage with a life you never bothered to learn about. That apartment you wanted rent for? I bought it with my own money, years before I met your son. The rent you wanted wasn't for the family, it was for you. And now you get nothing. Not my home, not my money, not my obedience. She tried to pivot, voice wobbling between anger and something that almost sounded like hurt. Daniel is devastated. He doesn't know what to do. I nodded slowly. Daniel's devastation isn't my responsibility. He had a chance to speak up, and he chose silence. That silence has consequences. This was the social consequence. I had stopped attending family gatherings. My absence became a statement. Relatives who'd watched Linda declare her new rent policy started asking questions. Daniel's father, who had demanded I apologize, received a brief message from me. I'm happy to discuss things calmly when Linda publicly acknowledges that my property is mine and apologizes for trying to charge me to live in it. That acknowledgement never came. Instead, I heard through a cousin that Linda had told everyone I was unstable and secretive. But the story didn't hold because too many people had seen the original scene. The truth was spreading faster than her version. The long-term consequences settled in over the following weeks. Daniel and I began marriage counseling, not to save the relationship, but to decide if it could be saved. I made it clear he needed to establish boundaries with his mother, and he needed to understand why his silence was a betrayal. He struggled. Linda, meanwhile, lost her key privileges entirely. I changed the locks on my primary apartment and installed a doorbell camera. She was never inside my home unsupervised again. There was one moment that stayed with me. About a month later, Daniel came to my studio, alone this time. He sat on the small sofa and said, "I keep thinking about that dinner. You didn't yell, you didn't cry. You just left. And I realized you'd been planning for that possibility. That's what scares me." I didn't deny it. I always believed in backup plans. But I never wanted to use this one. Your family gave me no choice. He lowered his head. I should have stopped her. Yes, I said, you should have. That was the moment the internal resolution solidified. I wasn't holding on to anger. I wasn't hoping for an apology that might never come. I was simply at peace with the fact that I'd protected myself when no one else would. I'd kept my dignity. I'd refused to be a tenant in my own life. And that changed everything. My universal message is simple. Boundaries are not betrayal. You can love someone and still refuse to be controlled by their family. You can be part of a marriage and still remain the owner of your own future. The people who respect you will adjust. The ones who don't will reveal themselves, and then the choice becomes crystal clear. I still have my secret studio, though it's not secret anymore. Now it's just mine. A reminder that I'm never— In the 3rd month of my marriage, my mother-in-law looked at me across my own kitchen table and announced that my apartment belonged to the family. Then she told me I need to pay rent to keep living in it. My husband just nodded. And that was the moment I knew they had made a very expensive mistake. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I spent my 20s building a life most people only talk about. I have a degree in architecture, a job at a respected firm, and 2 apartments. Yes, 2. But only one of them was part of the conversation when I married Daniel. The second one, that was my secret. And I had promised myself I would only use it if things went very wrong. At first, Daniel's family seemed warm. His mother, Linda, called me the daughter she never had. But the joke started before the wedding cake was even cut. Now that you're family, she'd say, what's yours is ours. Everyone laughed. I smiled. I assumed it was just her way of bonding. Then we returned from the honeymoon, and Linda's key, a key I never gave her, was already in my door. She let herself in whenever she wanted. She rearranged my kitchen. She said my gray curtains were too cold for a family home. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he said, "She's just excited. Don't make her feel unwelcome." So I swallowed it. I started coming home to find her on my sofa, flipping through my mail, offering suggestions about when we should have children and how she'd help raise them. The disrespect was slow, like water wearing down stone. She began calling my apartment the family property in casual conversation. Once, at a dinner I didn't plan, she invited 8 relatives without telling me. She patted my hand and said, "You're the newest addition, so you'll learn how we do things." I looked at Daniel. He was pouring wine for his uncle. That night, I drove to a part of town he didn't know about. It was a studio apartment in a quiet brick building, 20 minutes away. I'd bought it at 24, before I could even afford furniture. Over the years, I'd paid it off entirely. When I moved into my current apartment, I kept it as a rental, but I never listed it under my married name. I never even told Daniel. Something in my gut said to keep it, a silent insurance policy. I started going there after work just to breathe, sitting in the empty space where no one could claim ownership over me. After a weekend when Linda redecorated my bedroom, Throwing out my nightstand and replacing it with something she found at a flea market, I made a decision. I quietly moved my important documents to the studio, the deed to my primary apartment, bank statements, investment records, everything that proved the life I built was mine alone. I set up a separate mailing address. I even drafted a letter to my building management, clarifying that any rental requests or changes required my written consent and mine alone. I saved it in my drafts, ready to send. I wasn't planning for a fight. I was just making sure I had a door to walk through if I ever needed one. 3 months in, Linda decided it was time. She hosted another unplanned family dinner, her sister, brother-in-law, and 2 cousins. I cooked for 5 hours while she supervised from a chair. As dessert was served, she stood and tapped her glass. "I want to make a little announcement." She smiled at me, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "We've been talking, and we all agree it's time Claire truly became part of this family. This beautiful apartment, it's really a family asset now. So to help cover expenses, you'll start paying $1,000 a month. It's only fair." The room went still. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I looked at Daniel. He stared at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. I realized that if I accepted this, if I argued or cried or negotiated, I would be agreeing to a world where my home was not my own. I would be a tenant in my own life. And I refused. I set down my fork and smiled. "That's fine," I said. "I'll move back to my other apartment." The silence that followed was almost comical. Linda's mouth opened. Her sister's wine glass stopped midair. Daniel finally looked up, his face pale. What other apartment?" I stood, placed my napkin on the table, and walked calmly to the bedroom. Weeks earlier, I had packed a small bag. I grabbed it now, along with my keys, including the one they'd never seen, the one for the studio. Daniel followed me, a panicked edge in his voice. "Claire, what are you talking about? You can't just leave." I turned, voice steady. "You just let your mother tell me I need to pay to live in my own home. You didn't say a single word. So yes, I can leave. And I will." He tried to block the doorway, but I slipped past. As the elevator doors closed, I heard Linda's voice rising. "This is absurd. She's overreacting. We'll talk rationally when she comes back." In the car, my phone lit up. "Daniel, please come back. Mom didn't mean it that way." Then his father, a man I'd met twice. "You're causing a scene. Come back and apologize." Not one message asked if I was okay. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about control. I turned off notifications and drove. The studio was quiet and mine. I made tea and sat in the stillness. Then I opened my laptop and sent the email I had drafted weeks ago. It informed management that any inquiries regarding rental payments or ownership changes were to be directed solely to me as the sole owner. Linda's demand, made in front of witnesses, had just been documented. The rent she wanted would never arrive. But the consequences of her words were only beginning. Later that night, there was a knock. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel, phone in hand, his expression a mess of confusion and fear. Behind him stood Linda, arms crossed, face tight with rage. They had somehow found me. But they still didn't know the full truth, not about the documents, not about the email, not about the name on this lease. I leaned against the door without opening it, and a calm smile crossed my lips. They thought they'd cornered me. They had no idea the real consequences hadn't even started yet.